welcome and thank you for joining us for another exciting session of Informally Phone. Our today's topic is, during these trying times, is on everyone's mind, is the fiscal policy response of the government of Bangladesh. And talk about this very important subject is someone equally important who needs no introduction, Dr. Ahsan Mansur, Executive Director of Policy Research Institute, Bangladesh. A very warm welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Okay, very good. We are truly excited to have you, Dr. Mansur. We're going to be talking about fiscal policy. So let me just go right into my first question. How would you characterize the fiscal management in Bangladesh over the years? And also, what do you see as the major challenges in the fiscal front in the coming years, given the trying times that we're going through? Over to you, Dr. Mansur.
Thank you. You see, among the developing countries, Bangladesh has a stellar performance in the fiscal front so far, in the sense that in most developing countries, even including India, for example, which is a much stronger, bigger economy and so on, the main problem lies with the fiscal management and public debt that arises out of it. And Bangladesh has been quite prudently conservative, managed its expenditure very well with very limited fiscal resources. And we'll come to that later. But despite this resource constraint, its management of expenditure has been excellent, and fiscal deficit has always been very low, in the range of 3.5% to 5% on average for a decade or so, or for several decades. That has been the characteristic of our fiscal management, which is unusually stable, unusually strong, and served as an anchor to our macroeconomic management. Now, that being said, we have always been very weak in revenue collection. Generally, we used to have about 10–11% of GDP. Prior to the 1990 introduction of VAT, we used to have 6–7% of GDP. Then it increased to about 10–11% with the introduction of VAT and steady progress in the economy. And so in 2010 or so, we were around 12% of tax to GDP ratio. But unfortunately, we did not do much better in that front. And as a result, what's happening is that our fiscal problem is getting accentuated. What is happening is that fiscal overall size of the budget is now only 15%, 16% of GDP. Very low for an emerging developing economy like Bangladesh, where we need a lot bigger public sector and well-managed public sector. The resource constraint is the main. Resource constraint along with prudent expenditure management. So you cut down your expenditure and live within your means. Right. Essentially, that is the constraint that we are going to face in the coming years. As of now, as of last year, before the COVID, our tax to GDP ratio came down to 8.6%. That's the absolutely unacceptable level. And that I see as the major challenge for the government. There are also other challenges like expenditure management and quality of expenditure issue, allocation of expenditure to health, education, and other social sectors. So those are challenging issues, and that's why we need more and more money to intervene in those sectors in a very effective way. And resource constraint will never allow the government to intervene effectively, strongly, and with adequate resources to take the country forward in its journey.
Right, right. Dr. Mansur, I know you have always been a proponent. Those that listen to you know very well that you've always talked about, because we tend to always talk about debt to GDP ratio and things like that. But you've always talked about the ratio with revenue to GDP. What kind of revenue to GDP do we have? And if I hear you correctly, our tax net, of course, needs to be increased. So our revenue base increases. So that ratio increases. And also on the other side, what you're mentioning is the expenditure side also, we have to be a lot more efficient and in our allocation and stuff like that. Would that be correct, Dr. Mansur?
That's absolutely correct. And expenditure ratio, overall revenue to GDP ratio is less because our tax to GDP ratio is less.
Exactly.
And generally, it's about 1%, a little over 1% is our non-tax revenue. So that doesn't change. That's not very elastic either. So we have to focus on the tax to GDP ratio and a much more buoyant tax structure.
Right, right. Absolutely right. Absolutely right. Dr. Mansur, before I move on to the next question, let me clarify one other thing. You mentioned about the fiscal deficit. Given this current situation that we find ourselves in, where do you see it ending up? Where do you think it would end up?
In a pandemic situation like what we are facing, and like the rest of the world is facing, we can easily have much higher fiscal deficit for the next 1 or 2 years. And we can afford that. That is not an issue. Issue is that is the government ready to do it? Does it have other options? Why I said that it can do it? Because if you look at Germany, I was reading today that Germany is a very well managed fiscally prudent economy. What they did, they spent the most in this pandemic situation. They spent about 20% of their GDP as a fiscal stimulus to take the economy out of it. And the result is that they didn't have much increase in unemployment because they compensated, everybody was going to be laid off, they paid their salaries. They kept the domestic demand high, intervention in that. They have the capacity. Among the G7 countries or among the rich industrial countries, Germany has the most conservative, well-managed fiscal policy, and they were the most extravagant to intervene, and they have been very effective. Bangladesh is allowing of 3.6% of GDP as a stimulus package, but that is not fiscal spending. Keep in mind, our fiscal spending in the budget for that 1,06,000 crore taka, the stimulus package that they have announced is only 5,000 crore. Only 5,000 crore. So that's out of the package, the banks, Bangladesh Bank and the domestic banks are bearing about 98,000 crore, and the government is paying only 5,000 crore. So fiscal intervention in the true sense of it is very minimal. And even if you look at the total package of deficit, total deficit the country is projecting is only 6% from previous projection of 5%. At the end of the year, we may even find that it will come back to 4.5%. So we are not really responding strongly to the fiscal stimulus in Bangladesh. Okay. And that is not right. I think in the next 1 year, this year and the next year, we should have a stronger fiscal package to overcome this.
Very good. Dr. Mansur, you already answered my second question, which was really going to be in the budget that was announced 2021. How do you see our fiscal response vis-a-vis the COVID-19 situation? So you kind of answered that already. So if I hear you correctly, you're saying that it needs to be a lot stronger from a fiscal response standpoint. Is that correct, Dr. Mansur?
That is correct, and I will add a few points in the sense that I think in the health sector, if they have allocated this additional 10,000 crore taka as a contingency expenditure, because they will need it for vaccination purpose and many other interventions to contain the pandemic. So that allocation will be essential for the health purpose. That is not part of the budget yet in the ministry's budget, but that is a contingency allocation for health purposes, which will be needed. Secondly, what we proposed, but the government did not do it, is that we strongly suggested that the government should get into supporting livelihood support for those about 1.5 crore people who have been temporarily unemployed and fell to below the poverty level. They needed to be supported. And they are mostly in the urban areas, industrial areas and all that. They migrated to their villages or to the parents' home, etc., etc. They require financial support. But the government really did not extend much to them. There was only one small package, which the Prime Minister announced as a first bonus kind of things, 2,400 taka per family per person for 5 million persons.
Dr. Mansur, you know, our local economy is still a big portion of our GDP, about 70%. So many of these people and stuff that you are talking about shoring up by giving them some temporary support basically ends up driving consumption and hence adding to the economic activity. Absolutely right, Dr. Mansur. Let me just ask you now, overall, if you were to look at the budget, that's in place right now. Overall, in broad categories and very briefly, which areas, now I know you mentioned one area, but what other areas would you see that you would have wanted to see it differently?
I would say that government should also try to protect the development budget, because that creates jobs, accelerate them, not to add too many big mega projects anymore, not to add. Existing projects should continue, but do not add any more on that side, because they don't create too much employment. They're very capital intensive. But you add small projects across the country, road development, small road to be a wider road, so that creates a maximum employment effect for the left out people as a temporary job creation.
Absolutely.
That I would like to see. But what I'm seeing with the disturbed things, that they're cutting back on the development budget because they don't have the money. The revenue projection that I said, the revenue situation would be much bigger this year. They projected about 3.3 trillion taka as a NBR revenue target. Our projection is that it will be less than 2.5 trillion taka.
You know, when the budget was announced, one of the first things that came to my mind was their revenue collection target was way too high. Given the current situation, I do not even know how they came up with that. So that was obviously the first thing that came to mind. The second one, of course, I totally agree with you that the ADP, you know, the Annual Development Program ought to be continued, but we need to shift our strategy into more employment generation activities, just like you mentioned, you know, absolutely right. See, what happens is whenever there is, you know, private sector activity gets reduced, it's somehow the government steps in and public sector activity needs to absorb that slack, like happened after Second World War, as you know, in United States and elsewhere. So absolutely, you covered some brilliant points there. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, you know, government in the past has borrowed heavily from commercial banks. So now, this time around, and that creates a liquidity crisis, as you very well know. So this time around, what do you see? What do you see? What do you see as happening?
I see a problem, but I also see a way out. Problem is that government is going to borrow 85,000 crore from the banking system. That's their budget. And they're going to borrow. In addition, government has asked the banks to get into this special stimulus package of 106,000 crore. 106,000 crore. 1,06,000 crore. So that's a huge amount of credit expansion that the banking system has to do. Of course, a part of that will be financed by Bangladesh Bank by directly injecting money into the system. Another thing that is happening is a mixed blessing. Our reserves are growing, partly because of our misery, because we don't import much. And we're also having some returnees coming back from, workers coming back from abroad with their savings, so remittances has temporarily gone up. So both factors contributing to a reserve buildup, which is welcome. It has also a counterpart liquidity support. $1 billion reserve buildup means 8,500 crore in the banking system.
Sure.
So it does help the liquidity situation also. So overall, there is a lot of factors in play, and that will help continue both the expansion of the liquidity, the stimulus plan, government borrowing, as well as reserve buildup. But the core issue is that, are we going to lend enough to the SME sector to pull them out of the ruts? And the answer so far is that money is not going there. And that's where the focus has to be.
Absolutely, Dr. Mansur. I've conducted some sessions on the challenges faced by the SME sector. And I wish I had the time to discuss with you the 9% ceiling that the government has imposed, which to me, frankly speaking, is not practical. It won't work. And as you know, bankers are totally, I totally understand that, but nevertheless, that's for some other day. Yes, you're absolutely right. The incentive has to reach the SME sector for us.
9% ceiling is the main barrier against credit extension to the SME sector at this point.
Absolutely right. Dr. Mansur, I would love to discuss that on another day, but you know, we covered some very, very important areas. So now one last thing I would want to know from you is, well, two things actually. One is, you know, we're not the United States of America. We're dollar is the reserve currency of the world, so we can print at will. So we can print at will. Coming back to Bangladesh, you know, of course, printing money is always an option, but in our case, of course, should be a means of last resort, so to speak. So, of course, there is one other thing that helps in Bangladesh's favor is our external credit is also very well in control. So that's what generally gets countries into trouble. So this printing of money, do you see any inflationary effect because of that?
At this particular juncture, I will not be too much concerned about that. I would be concerned about push for domestic demand to be picked up and support that process. Why I'm not too much concerned? There are two components of inflation. I'm concerned about one component, which is the food inflation. I'm not concerned about the non-food. Where there is a problem is in the food category. And there I can see some price pressures. But that is nothing to do with monetary policy. And monetary policy cannot help that one. Because we have to provide rice for the population. And if there is a shortage of supply of rice, price will go up. If there's a shortage of supply of vegetable, prices will go up. Be it green chili, the prices will go up. So that is more a real economy issue and the policy issue to balance particularly the rice market and other commodity market with an import regime which will allow imports to come in time for that kind of pressure not to be built over time.
Dr. Mansur, just in conclusion now, I would like to get your views on the revenue side as well as on the expenditure side. Some of your recommendations that we ought to listen to.
I would say that this is not the year that you increase your taxes or hope to collect more taxes. You have to take it with a grain of salt and absorb the shock by increasing the deficit. But this is the year also that you must start thinking about fundamental reforms in the tax system and carry it forward this year and next 2-3 years so that we can come out of this hole. We have put ourselves over the years to a situation that our tax to GDP ratio this fiscal year will be about 7.5%. That is not acceptable. No country that I know of has that low tax to GDP ratio. And how could a country like Bangladesh can ever grow and provide the necessary services to the citizens without resources in his hand in the public sector? So we have to be fundamental. We have to undertake fundamental reforms in that area. There's scope for reforms in everywhere, in VAT, in direct tax system, in customs system. These are all identified. They have to build a political consensus and go for it. Doing nothing is not the solution. They have to act now on the reform side, not on the collection side.
Absolutely. Dr. Mansur, as you know, in my years as director of Dhaka Chamber, we have very vocally talked about the tax to GDP ratio, increasing the tax net, tax reform, and what have you. We have been talking about it for years.
The other area that government must look at also is that it must ensure quality of expenditure.
Absolutely.
Value for money. Because people will be willing to pay taxes also if they see value for money. Right now, people's perception is that you pay taxes, you don't get anything out of it. Why should I pay taxes? That's natural. So I have to get what I'm paying for, and the citizens must enjoy the service quality from the public sector. There is no service quality in the government right now. It's just operation machine, basically, if I say. And that is not right. Any office you enter, it's a suck. They suck you out. They don't give the service. They just extract rent from you. And that has to change. And the value for money, a development project, if it is 100 taka, I should at least get 90 taka worth of project done, not 30 taka worth of project done.
Dr. Mansur, I wish I had I wish I had more time on this session, but these are such fun subjects. I could talk to you for a much extended period of time and still not be done. But I'm sure we'll get together many more times. I would love to pick your brain on so many different areas. I would like to, again, thank you so very much, Dr. Mansur, for joining us for this session. And I would like to thank our audience for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this incredible conversation with Dr. Mansur. And with that, I sign off. Hope you stay safe. See you in the next session. Bye-bye.